everyone, my name is Vina, aka Miss WOCReader, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my September wrap-up. So, September was a month. I know I say every month was a month, but September was really a month. You know when you have those months where it seems like everything just breaks? That was September. So, the dryer broke, and I really couldn't read on those days that I had to wait for it to be fixed because that's all my mind was concentrating on. And the reason why I got it fixed instead of buying a new one is because new dryer is expensive. And also mine was like maybe 10 years old, and it's better to, I feel like, just fix the issue when it's for the most part still a good dryer versus outright buying a new one when it's not like 20 years old. Because the heating element broke, so it was running, it was spinning, it just wasn't heating the clothes, which should have been an easy fix. Repair person came out, like, very quickly, fixed it, it was running, and then when I went to run my first full load on it, just completely shut off. And it hit off to like I couldn't turn it back on to move it. So then had to call that person out again, and he's like, well, I fixed it, it was working when I left. I'm like, well, it's not working now, so you need to come back out. And he was giving me a little bit of a hard time to come back out for free. So what happened is, like, there had been like a piece loose that was connected to the vent, and he fixed that when he opened up the dryer to fix the issue with the heating element. So then, like, all the dust and like lint and all the stuff that gets vented out was just like in the tube, and it was clogging it. So, and he had not cleaned out the tube, so your dryer will shut down to prevent a fire, and that's what happened. So we got the tube cleaned out, got all the gunk cleaned out, got it back up and running again. Only cost me like $350, which is a lot still, but still cheaper than a new dryer. So those few days back and forth dealing with that, I wasn't really reading. And towards the end of the month, like literally the last day of the month, my phone broke. Like, it fell when it dropped. I didn't realize like that drop, because I drop my phone all the time. I didn't realize that drop like messed it up to the point where it wasn't charging anymore. So like I thought it was charging the whole night, and it didn't charge the whole night. And then I wake up, I'm like, oh my gosh, my phone didn't charge, and it was only charged the whole night. Tried like 3 different chargers, it's still not charging. Did not have time to go to the Verizon store right away because it was a work day. Couldn't get there till noon. By then, my battery is like close to dead, barely holding on for life. I use my phone even just to log in for work. We have to log in through an app on the phone. You have to be able to utilize the app to access the laptop. So got to the Verizon store, got a new phone. Like, new phones are nice in that you get better quality, like the camera quality on the new phone, crisp. But by the time I barely got my new phone activated, because like they like tried to use the old phone to activate the new phone, I didn't get to transfer anything over. It like died. I was able to recover some stuff in backup, like my apps and stuff. However, it had not been backing up all my photos since like mid 2024. So there's a lot of photos that I need to see if I can recover somehow. Not like a lot this year, but some from last year mostly. So that's a whole nother project that I have to work on because I can't turn that phone on. So we're gonna have to figure out that. And that made for a hectic ending of September. Then, to start off October, I realized, oh my gosh, my camera is broken. Like, the part where the battery is barely holding on by a thread. Like, stuff just started falling apart from it. I'm like, oh, that's not good. So I need to get a new camera because this one is barely working as is. But I'm waiting. You know, there's like some Prime sale coming up, and around the Prime sales, a lot of retailers drop their prices. So we will see what good deal I can get on the camera, because cameras are expensive. But I prefer to have a separate camera for doing YouTube versus using my phone, just because it's a lot of storage when it comes to the phone, a lot of transfer back and forth. And sometimes I like to look at my phone when doing videos, so I just feel like it's easier to have a separate camera. And I also use the camera for everyday events as well. So now that I've told you about how my September went, let's get into the books that I read. This is Jazzy the Witch in Broom Doom by Jessica Bagley. This is the first in a middle grade graphic novel series. I was very intrigued by this. Thank you to Simon & Schuster for sending me a copy. So we follow this young witch named Jazzy, and she's not really interested in witchy things, but she lives in a town full of witches, very matriarchal society. I don't remember seeing any male characters like that. She has 2 mothers, and she also lives with her grandmother. They come from a long line of broom makers, and in the future they want her to take control of the family business. However, she's just not interested in brooms and flying and witches. She does find out about cycling and becomes enamored with that, goes to the library, finds every book she can on bicycles and cycling, and decides to build her own bike. Meanwhile, her little hater friend was jealous, like, that she was saying she wasn't that interested in the witchy stuff while her friend, like, was trying to be super witch. And so her little hater best friend gets mad at her, even casts a silencing spell on her at one point because she's tired of hearing her talk about bikes. But like, Jazzy's enthusiasm for bicycles actually helps improve her magic. So this is a story about being like able to embrace different things, even if it's not the norm, which I really appreciated that message. Didn't love her best friend. Like I said, her little friend was a hater. It also didn't help that her friend was white, so like the dynamics looked a little weird there. But overall, I think this is a good book for somebody who's just starting to get into witches. Maybe they're not fully in a fantasy game, but they're intrigued because it does pull from some classic witch lore as well. Family Spirit by Diane McKinney Whetstone. So this is actually a relatively short book if you are looking for a quick kind of vibey read. It is a book within a book, which book within a book is kind of hit and miss for me. I didn't really love that element here. We follow our narrator who is going through some drama with her husband and they're kind of disconnected, but at the same time she's writing a book about the Mace Women. So the Mace Women that we follow are Ayana and Lil. Lil is Ayana's aunt. Ayana has returned home from college. Her mother has always kind of shied away from the Mace family and told her to stay from those weirdos, but she's experiencing her powers of clairvoyancy, and at the same time, Lil is coming back to Philadelphia for the first time in years, and there's lots of like things that they need to address. We do spend a good chunk of time in Lil's POV, specifically her POV in the past, like when she was a young woman going to school in Philadelphia, learning her way, meeting people she could trust and couldn't trust, trying to use her communications, I think it was communications degree, to try and get a place in local TV. Philadelphia is really its own main character here, and as somebody who has spent a lot of time in Philadelphia the past few years, there were a lot of places that I recognized here that I thought was pretty cool, and I think Philadelphia readers will enjoy that as well. I was intrigued throughout. Like, it definitely kept me entertained. I was like listening to this book while I was commuting to and from work every day. And I would check out something again by this author. She has like a somewhat poetic way of writing. This is Augmented by Kenichi Odugo. It has like the sprayed paperback edges. It came courtesy of Faber. They are a UK publisher, but they also sell their books in the US. So I ended up buying this through Amazon because I had it on my wish list for a while, and I'm just like, I'm in the mood for some light sci-fi because I'm not a heavy sci-fi reader, and I was curious to read a dystopian by a Black author since everybody is asking for the dystopian trend to come back. This is set in a near future London where climate change has ravaged the earth, and it's to the point where nothing new is really growing and cities are under big domes. You have a few people who have these like special abilities where they can cause plant growth, and the government plans on having them have surgery to enhance these abilities to help like kind of grow the earth. And our main character is counting down to augmentation day when her abilities can be enhanced. She soon finds that music affects her abilities, so she ends up going to this special academy to learn more, where she discovers some rebels and that everything that the government is saying isn't quite true, and they have their own agenda. This is a very easy dystopian read. There's some romance in here, but I appreciated that the romance didn't take up the entire plot. And this was a very quick read. So if you want something kind of light fantasy that you don't have to think too hard but is still enjoyable, I would recommend checking this one out. A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. This one is by Sangu Mandana. I had not read her Irregular Witches book or any of her middle grades, so this was my intro to her, and I enjoyed this for the most part. I will say it slowed down a little bit closer towards the end, but I thought she did a great job balancing both the cozy elements while also having like a plot and some stakes, because often I hear people talk about cozy fantasy and they're just like, it's low stakes, and I'm like, what does low stakes really mean? Because low stakes can mean different things depending on the book. And also I tend to see like the cozy fantasies that I've encountered be more about the cozy elements, but they don't give me enough like of a plot. I like the story to keep moving. I like an end goal. So I like that this had it. We follow Sarah, and she is Indian and white. I can't remember the exact country that her mother's family came from. I want to say it was Eastern European. But basically, when she was a child, parents were always off doing their own thing. They dumped her on an aunt. She was considered a very gifted young witch, so the British Witch Guild took her in, and she was mentored under like this guy who was like a total mustache twirling villain. Well, her aunt dies, and she decides to use a spell that a fox familiar told her to revive her aunt, and Witches Guild finds out, kicks her out, exiles her. At the same time, this spell leaves her with barely any magic left. So she has just enough magic left to try and keep the inn running. And they do what they can at the inn, but she is wishing to restore her powers. And one day, between the fox familiar and an old friend, she comes across this spell book. Even though it's in another language, the spell might just be the spell to restore her powers. Enter Luclar, and he is like the quintessential like image of what the guild should look like. However, he has an autistic sister that he is caring for because his parents don't know how to. And he stumbles upon the inn, and it really starts to feel like a safe haven for his sister, so he agrees to help Sarah by translating the spell and helping her gather the ingredients. I loved like the cute elements of the inn, like the teas, cookies. Like, this is a great book, I think, for transitioning from fall to winter. It did slow down a little bit towards the end. I also think that we kind of danced around race in class a little bit. Like, she wanted to speak on it, she spoke on it a little bit, but we never addressed it when it came to the love interest, like, who is a white man, and I feel like that needed to be addressed to really hit home. And like, Sarah, while she is half Indian, she wasn't raised in any kind of Indian culture, and that's also not addressed. Like, her dad's side is where she gets her abilities from, but there's nothing culturally different about the way in which he and his people perform magic. So I would have loved to see that expanded on a little bit more. The romance was okay with light and breezy. It wasn't like offensive. The only thing I didn't like is she tried to be a little spicy and add some like spicy scenes that tonally did not fit this book and could have honestly been left out. But overall, cute read. I would pick up something else by her. Keeping up with witches and witchy vibes, I read Witch You Would. This is by Leah Amador. And I was excited about this one because I wanted something light and witchy and fun. This is a magical rom-com, and it's about a spell casting reality show competition, which is right up my alley. I loved everything about this spell casting reality show. We are following Penelope and Gil, aka Leandro. Both have their reasons for entering the competition, and they desperately both need the prize money. There's a little bit of sabotage happening to some of the contestants along the way. They get some shady offers. I felt like the romance was the only thing that really didn't click for me here because they didn't have a lot of chemistry, and I felt like they were forced together way too fast. The way the sex scenes were done, they were a little bit jokey, and also the way in which the narrator read them in the audiobook while I was listening like to and from work. She just read them in like not a sexy tone, but more like a happy, jokey tone, and that just took me out every time. But this is a debut. If you are into something witchy, I would recommend checking this out. I love the Cuban culture that was written throughout. I like that this was set in Miami, and we got a lot of Miami culture, but this is a Miami where magic is a norm. So all of that I ate up. Speaking of Miami, I read Dominoes, Danzon, and Death by Raquel V. Reyes. This is the fourth book in the Caribbean Kitchen Mystery series. I've been reading this series since book 1. It's a cozy mystery. I really enjoyed this one a lot more than book 3. So in this one, I think Miriam's daughter is now about a year old, maybe 2 years tops. But her daughter is older, whereas in the last book she was just being born. And I loved watching their family develop. She's still going strong with her YouTube series and her local TV show series. Her friend, who is also a producer on one of her shows, gets accused of murder, and she has to help her clear her name. As always with the rest of the books in this series, this balances a lot of facts about Caribbean culture, specifically through cuisine. But also in this one, we add some elements of voodoo and Santeria and the spiritual aspect of that, which I thought was pretty interesting to read a character who is getting more in tune with their spirituality. And the mystery is pretty simple, easy to figure out. And I loved the different elements of Miami culture, and this is a series that you definitely have to read on a full stomach because it will have your mouth watering. So Blood Moon was like my dud of the month, unfortunately, by Brittany S. Lewis. This is her first fantasy book. I read her debut book and I didn't love her debut book. I liked it well enough, but I thought like it was really starting to come together when it was ending. And I feel like pacing is still a big issue for her because it's a big issue in Blood Moon. So we're following Mira, and her mother disappeared and she's not sure why. She gets this offer to go to this university that's not far from her house. And this is a town in which there are werewolf legends that people heavily believe in and are somewhat obsessed with. And she starts to notice weird paranormal things happening on campus. So much of this book didn't make any sense to me. For one, I didn't even read Twilight, But Twilight is so like heavy in the book community and pop culture in general that there were a lot of stuff that was ripped straight from Twilight that I recognized easily here. And I'm sure a lot of stuff, even more than what was included, was in here, but just went over my head as a non-Twilight reader. She also took inspiration from the Vampire Diaries, and when I tell you she took inspiration, bar for bar, word for word, she was copying stuff, like down to how magic worked. I didn't really understand the magic system here. Like, you have werewolves, but then you have blood lycans, which are werewolves that just so happen to drink blood. And then you have actual vampires, which I don't think the actual vampires really made an appearance here. And you have like rival werewolf clans, and no, I'm lying. The actual vampires did make an appearance, and yeah. But you have rival werewolf clans, and I really didn't fully understand why they were rivals. You have a love triangle that was very forced here. When I say it was forced, like, there was a character literally pointing out it was a love triangle, and that was just way too meta for me. I'm like, nobody talks like that, and I hate when contemporary books do that. People do not talk in tropes in real life, even if they love books. So the fact that this character was like, oh my gosh, love triangle, like every time the subject of Mira and these boys came up, got on my nerves and took me out of the story every time. Mira, this is in Mira's point of view, but we also get her parents referred to by their first names all the time, which didn't make any sense given that she had a close relationship to him. And I'm just like, that's also not something that Black people really do. It's a respect thing that we just don't call our parents by their first names. And even when she was addressing her dad, she called him dad. So it was just very confusing to me to be reading her POV where she was referring to him as his first name. Very disrespectful, actually, in my opinion. And it just also, it was just weird, so it just took me out of the story every single time, because at first I was like, wait, who is that? And then I'm like, wait, that's her parents. Because it happened to both her mom and her dad. She was just referring to them by their names the entire text. And like I said, most of the backstory just came out of Twilight or came out of the Vampire Diaries. This is like Bella Swan x Elena Gilbert is really how I can describe Mira, not so much Bonnie Bennett's Revenge. She was also really stupid. Like, really stupid. It got really old how, even though she grew up with these legends and believed them her whole life and like thought werewolves were real, the moment it comes down to, oh, werewolves could actually be real, she's like, oh my gosh, it couldn't be. Werewolves? No way they can be real. And I just felt like we spent too much time in her head. I feel like the university wasn't really developed here. Like, it could have been set in high school because it felt like high school. There was a lot of forced interactions between her and Julian. My camera battery died. And where was I on Blood Moon? Okay, Julian Santos. So Julian Santos was the main love interest, and quite frankly, I still don't feel like we got to know much about him, so I was so confused as to how she fell in love with him. Like, at least with Seven, she claimed she was getting to know him well, although most of that happened off page. Like, we would get quick recaps of her time with Seven, which also got on my nerves because I'm like, so the Black love interest barely gets anything. And most of her bonding with him happens off screen, is just referenced on screen. And he would disappear for pages on end. Then we have Julian. I'm not sure what ethnicity he was supposed to be because his last name is Santos. Spanish last name does not equal Latin. And that is something that the book community is really ignorant to. And you'd think because they do a lot of reading that they would be more aware of. So like, even though he and his aunt had Spanish last names and they had different Spanish last names, he could have been Filipino, he could have been Italian, he could have been something else. So like, we're just like operating under the assumption that he's Latin, but also Latin really doesn't tell you anything about anybody either. I was like scouring the book trying to figure out like what country of origin his family was from. And I don't think that was ever mentioned because I couldn't find anything. And you'd think that would also affect how he operates in life, because they're at a PWI, but the way in which they operate based off of their race just never comes up. So I really feel like this was a book where we took way too much inspiration from Twilight and the Vampire Diaries and not enough originality. And by the time she started adding little things of originality, it was towards the end. Like, everybody will rave about the last 20%, but in my opinion, the last 20% wasn't really earned. The only thing I liked was when she was almost getting killed. But other than that, it wasn't really earned, and the reveals were info dumped rather than explained to us along the way. So I don't know if this was like the same experience y'all had reading Twilight, but if it was, I'm glad that I didn't read Twilight either. This was not enjoyable for me, and as somebody who is writing, or like, well, I already have written like 2 drafts, so as somebody who also has a fantasy set in a university setting, I was also paying attention to how the school was incorporated, how local culture was incorporated, and I just don't feel like that was done well. I couldn't picture what this campus looked like. It was just generic campus by the woods. Yeah, I will not be continuing with Blood Moon as a series. That is everything that I read during the month of September. Let me know if any of these books sound interesting to you. If you like this video, make sure and hit that like button. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!